There is a man who, at the peak of his wealth, controlled roughly 2% of the entire American economy. Not 2% of an industry, 2% of a nation. His name was John D. Rockefeller, and he started with 50 cents. I have been obsessed with this story for a long time, and the thing that keeps pulling me back is not the empire. It is the beginning. Because when you look at where Rockefeller came from, the household he grew up in, the father who raised him, the chaos that surrounded his childhood, you realize that nothing about his future success was inevitable. Everything he became, he built deliberately. Habit by habit, cent by cent. Let's start with the father, because you cannot understand John D. Rockefeller without understanding William Avery Rockefeller. Big Bill, they called him, and Big Bill was a con man. Not metaphorically, literally. He traveled the countryside selling fake cancer cures, posing at times as a deaf mute, charming strangers out of their money with a smile and a handshake, and absolutely no conscience about any of it. He was large, handsome, generous when he felt like it, and gone for months at a stretch. He eventually took a second wife while still legally married to Eliza, John's mother. He was a bigamist. And here's the thing that I find almost unbelievable. Big Bill was proud of this. He bragged about what he was teaching his sons. He actually said, and this is documented, "I cheat my boys every chance I get. I want to make 'em sharp." I mean, what a thing to say. What a thing to be proud of. But here is what I think actually happened. John watched his father. He studied him the way you study a cautionary tale when you are young and perceptive and a little frightened. He saw the charm. He saw the waste. He saw what a man looks like when he has no anchor, no discipline, no system. And he decided, somewhere deep in his formation, that he would be the opposite of that. The counterforce in the household was his mother, Eliza. Devout Baptist, frugal to the bone, disciplined in a way that was almost severe. She taught her children to work, to save, and to tithe. She ran the household on whatever money Big Bill left behind, and she ran it well, because she had to. From her, John absorbed something that would stay with him for the rest of his 97 years. The belief that money was not to be enjoyed carelessly, but managed. That waste was not just impractical, it was a moral failing. The family moved constantly. Richford, New York, where John was born in 1839. Then Owego. Then, eventually, Cleveland, Ohio, in 1853. Each move sharpened his self-reliance, because he had no choice but to be self-reliant. There was no safety net. Big Bill might come home flush, or might not come home at all. And so, from roughly age 7 or 8, Rockefeller was already earning small money, raising turkeys, selling produce to neighbors, and keeping track of every cent of it. This is not a small detail. This is everything. Because by the time he was a teenager, those informal childhood accounts had become something systematic. Ledger A. That is what historians call his first formal personal account book. It is one of the most remarkable documents in American business history. In it, Rockefeller recorded every cent he earned, every cent he spent, every small charitable donation, every transportation cost, every penny lent and repaid. He was a teenager. He was keeping books on his own life the way a trained accountant keeps books on a corporation. And here is what I find most extraordinary about Ledger A. He tithed from the very beginning, before he had any real money, before there was any empire to speak of. He tithed on whatever small wages came in, and he recorded each donation with the same precision he recorded everything else. Ron Chernow, who wrote the definitive biography of Rockefeller, Titan, documents this clearly. and Rockefeller himself said it plainly later in life. I never would have been able to tithe the first $1 million I ever made if I had not tithed my first salary, which was $1.50 per week. That is the whole philosophy right there, in one sentence. The discipline is not something you apply when the stakes get high. You build it when the stakes are nothing. You practice it on 50 cents so that it is automatic when the number has 9 zeros. September 26, 1855. Rockefeller was 16 years old. He walked the streets of Cleveland for days, going business to business, asking for work as a bookkeeper. Methodical, not desperate.
And when Hewitt and Tuttle finally hired him as an assistant bookkeeper, he said later, "I felt that I was now a man." He called that date, not his birthday, his true personal holiday. The day he started working. The day the ledger of his real life opened. The foundation was already there. The chaos of Big Bill had taught him what not to be. Eliza had given him the discipline and the faith. And a small leather account book had given him the system. Everything that followed, the refineries, the railroads, the empire, would be built on exactly this: the habit of precision, the practice of giving, the absolute refusal to be his father. He was 16 years old, and he was already becoming the most dangerous businessman in American history. He walked the streets of Cleveland for days. 16 years old, going door to door, business to business, asking for work as a bookkeeper. Not desperate, methodical. There is a difference. When Hewitt and Tuttle finally hired him, he wrote in his diary that September 26, 1855, was his real birthday. Not the day he came into the world, the day he entered it. I felt that I was now a man. And from that first day, he applied himself with a totality of focus that would never leave him. His first 3 days of work earned him 50 cents. He recorded it in Ledger A, and then he tithed on it. 50 cents. He gave away a portion of 50 cents to his church. That detail stops me every time, because this was not performance. Nobody was watching. It was just him and the ledger. The discipline was real. And what he was doing at that desk at Hewitt and Tuttle went way beyond adding columns. He was studying how commerce actually worked. The railroad rates, the shipping costs, the commodity prices, the personalities of the men who supplied them. He worked 12, 14-hour days, and he absorbed everything. Within 2 years, he was catching financial discrepancies his employers had missed. He was 18 years old, and he was already better at the business than the men who owned it. So at 18, he left. He scraped together $1,000 in savings and went to his father for the other $1,000 he needed to start his own produce commission firm with a partner named Maurice Clark. Big Bill lent him the money at 10% interest, full commercial rates. His own son. And John paid every cent back, on time, and recorded every payment in the ledger.
I love that detail, actually, because Big Bill thought he was teaching his son to be sharp. What he actually did was give his son one more reason to build something so large and so ironclad that no one could ever hold anything over him again. Clark and Rockefeller did well. And then in 1859, something happened out in Titusville, Pennsylvania, that would change everything. Edwin Drake struck oil, and Rockefeller watched. He did not rush in. He observed the chaos, the fires, the bankruptcies, the wild price swings, and he waited. Patience was always one of his sharpest weapons. By 1863, he was ready. He entered oil refining as a side investment. By 1865, at 25 years old, he bought out his partners at auction for $72,500 and took complete control of the refinery. He would later say it was one of the most important moments of his life. And then he moved. Fast. Henry Flagler joined as a partner in 1867, bringing capital and, crucially, an instinct for negotiating with railroads.
Together they did something their competitors couldn't understand. They guaranteed the railroads enormous, reliable volume in exchange for secret rebates on shipping rates. While everyone else was focused on selling oil, Rockefeller was focused on making oil cheaper to produce and cheaper to move than anyone else on Earth. He built his own barrel-making operations, his own pipelines, his own tank cars. Every link in the chain that he could control, he controlled. I would rather earn 1% off 100 people's efforts than 100% of my own efforts. That is the whole philosophy, right there. Leverage, organization, scale. On January 10, 1870, Standard Oil Company of Ohio was incorporated. Rockefeller was 30 years old. And then came what his competitors would call the Cleveland Massacre. Within roughly 6 weeks in 1872, Standard Oil absorbed 22 of its 26 Cleveland rivals. Some were bought out. Some were simply crushed. The speed of it was breathtaking. The ruthlessness of it was undeniable. Rockefeller did not apologize for it. He called it salvation. He genuinely believed the chaotic competition of the early oil industry was destroying everyone in it.
The day of combination is here to stay. Individualism is gone, never to return. Now, I want to be honest with you here. The methods were brutal. The railroad rebate schemes triggered a massive public scandal that same year. Ida Tarbell would spend years documenting what Standard Oil did to its competitors, and much of what she found was damning. Rockefeller was not a saint in the marketplace. But here is what is also true. He built something that had never existed before. By 1878, Standard Oil controlled roughly 90% of American oil refining. And the way he ran it? The obsession with cost, with efficiency, with eliminating every drop of waste. That part was genuinely extraordinary. There is the famous story about the oil cans. He asked his engineers why each can required 40 drops of solder to seal. They tested 38. Too many leaked. They tried 39. It held. Standard Oil switched to 39 drops. Across millions of cans, the savings were real. The secret to success is to do the common things uncommonly well. That was not a saying for him. That was an operating principle applied to every single thing he touched. In 1882, the Standard Oil Trust was formally established, a novel legal structure that allowed him to consolidate control over 40-plus companies across state lines. It became the model, and eventually the warning, for every trust that came after it. And through all of it, the acquisitions, the negotiations, the legal battles, the public fury, he remained ice calm. Competitors who lost their composure lost the room. Rockefeller almost never lost his composure. I always tried to turn every disaster into an opportunity. That was not spin. That was how he actually processed the world. He had been doing it since childhood. Thank you for listening to the story of John D. Rockefeller. If you'd like more stories like this, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment on who you'd like to hear about next.